Welcome back to the Word for the Valley podcast. We've been listening to Pastor Mike teach in depth through the book of Matthew. And in this section, Jesus will say, turn the other cheek when someone slaps you, or let them have your cloak if they want to take your tunic, and go the extra mile if they compel you to go 1 mile. So how do I offer wholehearted grace towards a person who's treating me like this? Let's listen closely to Pastor Mike's teaching on this section as we pick up in chapter 5, verse 38.
So as we've been progressing here through the Sermon on the Mount, and that's the section that we're looking at here, Matthew chapters 5, 6, and 7 are one continuous sermon. We've gotten to the place here where Jesus now is giving us definitions of what the kind of morality and character that is fit for the kingdom of heaven. We had the question in Sunday night small group, is this written for believers or non-believers? The answer to that question is it's written for both. For non-believers, as they read this, they should realize that they've fallen far short of the standard of God, and without mercy and grace given to them through faith in Jesus Christ, that they will be condemned to hell eternally, that there is no way any of us are going to meet God's standard on our own. And we'll see that at the end here, chapter 5, where he actually says that the standard of heaven is perfection. So for an unbeliever, we should look at that and say, there's no way that this is going to happen. But for the born-again New Testament Christian that actually has the Holy Spirit of God living inside them, what we're going to find is God is going to make us more like this. Now, we may never quite get to the full measure of the standard, but this will be the direction that we grow in, and we will grow in this almost whether we like it or not, whether we agree with it in our own mental capacities or not. That these standards are going to start to be developed in us because of the Holy Spirit of God transforming us. And just take notice of this. I don't know that we say this enough, right? Being saved is not knowing the right information. Being saved is a transformative work of the Holy Spirit through faith in Jesus Christ that makes you something that you are not in your flesh. And if you are not becoming something that you can't be in your flesh, so people say, well, I can't do that. Of course you can't in your flesh. Of course you can't. But in the Spirit, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And it's the transformative work, the born-again experience of God that makes us grow into these kinds of things, makes us capable of being what we ourselves cannot be. That is an actual evidence that we are in fact saved. Some of us need to take a good hard look at our lives and say, I'm not doing any of this stuff, and I don't even care. And it may be evidence that no matter how long you've gone to church, you're not even a Christian. And God may need to rattle our cage a little bit like that. But for those of us who are being transformed, this gives us an idea like, oh, that's what's happening, right? Sometimes God changes us with he washes our heart with a little washcloth. Sometimes he washes our heart with a little bit of sandpaper. Sometimes he washes our heart with a cheese grater, right? And I think this is kind of one of those cheese grater kind of moments. But it is an evidence, if we care, that we're actually his sons and his daughters. Which should be a great confirmation to those of us who are feeling that way. Now, verse 38 then says, you have heard that it was said. So he, in these descriptions now, he's gone through murder, which he actually says is angry, being angry in your heart without a cause towards somebody. That's murder. He then dealt with adultery, which he said was lusting for somebody in your heart. That was basically adultery, he said. He said that marriage is binding except if the spouse of the married person committed sexual immorality. Then that was the only case of permissible divorce. Otherwise, marriage is binding. And then he moved on in to say that oaths were binding. Basically, your word is binding. But your yes be yes and your no, no. Whatever is more than that is of the evil one. Now he moves into, if you thought it was going to get easier, you're wrong, right? We're actually ratcheting it up somewhat by saying you have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye, and a tooth for a tooth. Common phrase, by and large, even to the modern day. Something even, somebody that would be unfamiliar with the Bible would have heard this phrase, hey, an eye for an eye. Because it seems like it's a kind of a fun Bible verse that gives us permission to be vengeful, which is the way that the religious leaders, even of Jesus' day, took it. It's not how it was written. It was how it was interpreted, which is the problem with all of these things that Jesus is correcting. It was written primarily from Leviticus and Exodus and Deuteronomy. It was written primarily to be given to the judges to make sure that the judges that they were overseeing, the cases that they were overseeing, had a proper justice meted out, right? So if somebody came in and was guilty of a particular crime, got into a fight, punched a guy in the eye, the guy lost his eye, well, just measure would not be to cut the other guy's head off because he gouged out the one eye. That would be too much. That would be over the top. So in an effort to make sure the judges were administering justice fairly, it was a measure that if the crime was an eye, then justice required an eye and no more. But it was never meant for personal retaliation. This verse was never meant for individuals. It was meant for people in areas of responsibility. But what the religious leaders of Jesus' day said, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, that if somebody punched you and you lost a tooth, that you were obligated, was the law of retaliation, the avenger of blood kind of concept. You would have been obligated to track that guy down and punch him until one of his teeth came out. Now, if accidentally, in so doing, you punched him until two of his teeth came out, then he would be obligated in return to track you down and punch you until another one of your teeth came out. And they taught it as a measure of obligation. Not just permission, but they were expected to do it. But now Jesus comes in verse 39 and says, but I tell you not to resist an evil person. And the concept here is to not resist them with evil. Now, we're going to go down through this, and I want to just clear this up from the very, very beginning, okay? There is a difference in this passage between how somebody treats me and how they treat somebody that I am responsible for. If somebody hurts my children, they're going to get full-on Mike Gogler Rambo. And it's supposed to be that way because my responsibility to defend my children overrides this concept because it doesn't apply in that particular situation. And we'll explain in just a second. All right? Some people have taken these verses and they've gone into some extreme form of pacifism or non-warfare. And that it doesn't apply at all. What we're talking about here is we're talking about personal retaliation. We're talking about how people treat us, not how they're treating people I have a responsibility to care for. Therefore, if somebody hurts my people, my family that I oversee, if somebody attacks my personal property, I still have a right to defend my personal property. That's given to us in the law. Actually, if somebody comes in the middle of the night in the Old Testament, you were actually allowed to kill them, right? You didn't have to hold back. If it was daytime and you could prevent from killing them, then you were expected to do that. But at nighttime, if somebody came into your house, stealing your stuff, you had right to defend your personal property. Law enforcement, the powers that be, are ordained of God, and they do not bear the sword in vain. The same goes for the military. This does not speak against any of those things, so do not apply it in that context. It's not what we're talking about. Does this make sense? So again, if somebody comes after me, I have a particular kind of responsibility to not avenge myself. If somebody comes after somebody that I'm caring for, then it's my responsibility to not just avenge myself, but to stand up and defend them. Okay? It's a whole different mindset in how we respond. We're not doing it for ourselves. We're doing it to care for somebody else, which is actually love in that setting. Okay? If you have questions about that, I'm sure there's some to work out in all of that. So he says here, do not resist an evil person. Now, but whoever, now the three cases he gives to us in 39, 40, and 41. The first case is whoever slaps you on your right cheek, turn the other to him also. Now, just take notice here. This is a slap fight, which is not a real fight. Okay? If you're watching an MMA fight and a guy's slapping, it's usually he's going backwards and he's going to get knocked out. And it's just that last second, like, ah! Or he's a Diaz brother and he's just doing it to make fun of you. But that's a different thing, right? It's not an actual assault. It's an insult. All right? If somebody is assaulting you, you are allowed to defend yourself. You are allowed to go and get cover. You are allowed to run. You are allowed to make sure that it doesn't continue to happen. Okay? You're not expected to stand there and get assaulted. What he's talking about here is he's talking about an insult. You're getting slapped on the cheek. So he says, whoever slaps you in your right cheek, turn to him the other also. If you just happen to have somebody in your life who just likes to insult you, don't let it bother you, is what he's saying. Don't let it bother you. What does it matter, right? Doesn't really matter, and it doesn't have to affect your behavior. If he wants to slap you on your right cheek, give him the other one also, and then maybe eventually he'll slap himself out and just get tired of slapping. If it doesn't change you, it doesn't affect you, it doesn't get a rise out of you, just let it go. Then in verse 40 he says, if anyone wants to sue you and take away your tunic, let him have your cloak also. Now again, take notice. He's not coming into the person's house and stealing it. He's suing you. He's putting you through some formal measure of taking your stuff. This is not just about going in and getting the stuff. This is about like humiliating you to do it. Putting you on display, right? Personally, kind of in some ways offending you and walking away with your stuff. And so he says, listen, if anyone wants to sue you and take away your tunic, which is the undershirt, basically, it would be like our shirts. Then he says, well, then give him your jacket too, right? If he's already got your shirt, give him your jacket too. And just kind of let it go. And then he says in verse 41, and whoever compels you to go 1 mile, go with him too. Again, just take notice. He's not hijacking this person. That's different. That would require vengeance. What he's doing instead is he's obligating them. And in this society with the Roman soldiers, they could compel somebody to drop whatever they were doing and pick up their pack and walk them 1 mile down the road if they wanted to. Well, Jesus says if that's the case, then pick up that pack and take it 2 miles. And show him that he's actually not in charge of you, but that in fact I'm in charge of you. Now you're acting based on what I'm asking you to do and not just on what he's obligating you to do. Go over and above. And in all of these cases, that's what he's saying. Now it's interesting here, right? Verse 39 deals with an insult. Verse 40 deals with an offense. Verse 41 deals with an obligation. Again, these aren't crimes. These aren't assaults. These are relational offenses. These are humiliations. These are things that people use in an effort to try to promote themselves over other people, to make themselves feel better. We all know this about the smallest kid on the playground, and I know this from personal experience, that they oftentimes develop the biggest mouths because they ain't going to go fight the biggest guy. But they might be faster than him and can talk about it a whole lot, yell at him, make fun of him, come up with all kinds of witty, snarky comebacks. And when the guy finally gets so upset that he's going to pound the little man runs away. And so it's his way of winning the battle that he knew he can't win physically, but he's trying to win it in a different way. We live in a world where people are trying to make up for their insecurities in a million different ways relationally, and oftentimes resort to these very things: insults, personal offenses, and material obligations. And it's their way of controlling you. It's their way of winning the argument. They're not going to get out a gun. They don't want to escalate to that degree. If they do, it's a whole different matter. Law enforcement, everything else comes into play. This is relational. And what Jesus is talking about here is, how do you respond in the middle of that? How do you respond when you're insulted? Right? Little people figure out how to insult first, and then when they're insulted, they figure out how to insult better. You just become really good with your tongue, really good with your wit, tearing big people down, right? It's not the life of Christ. It's not the way he wants us to work. What do you do when you're offended? Somebody sues you for something that doesn't even belong to them, makes a public spectacle of this and offends you. How do you respond? You get angry, counter-sue, right? Take him for all he's worth? Or do you let it go? Do you offer grace? Do you carry on? How do you respond? And how do you respond when somebody obligates you? Some law enforcement officer just, probably fresh out of the academy, starts to throw his weight around at a traffic stop. You make a big deal of it. This is what we're seeing all over the country. That's the way. Or just say, hey, dude, just, it's okay. You want me to get out? I'll get out. You want me to do whatever, right? Just, it's fine. Do you go along with it? You humble yourself, or do you exalt yourself? This is what he's asking. In all of these cases, basically what Jesus is asking us to do is he's asking us to remain normal. Which doesn't seem like a whole lot, but it is. That you would continue to treat that person like you would have treated him the first time you met him. Even though you know that he is due for giving you an insult. If you are there around him for 30 minutes, you're going to be made fun of. Do you still treat him normal? Do you still extend yourself? Or do you start to guard? You start to recoil? You start to fire back? Or can you maintain this open, soft spirit because you know that God is ultimately overseeing your life and that whatever this person says doesn't really matter all that much anyway? To continue to serve and bless and even offer another cheek for a beating. Now you only have two. I don't know where he goes after that, right? Can you extend yourself that way? If you're personally offended, right? And you know there are people like this, right? Every time, you give them a ride in your car, and before you drop them off, they're asking you to take the stuff out of your cup holder. Oh, do you really need that change? Right? Oh, do you really need this? Oh, do you? Oh, hey, oh, that's really, oh, that's really nice. Oh, do you want it? Well, no, I don't want to ask. At least not outright. But they're kind of always putting you over on a barrel, right? They're just kind of always. When you have the opportunity to take them, do you take them the next time? Do you extend yourself again? Knowing it's going to offend you. Before the ride's over, they're going to say something stupid about your clothes. Which, if you're a guy, you don't care, probably. And if you do, you probably deserve it. But nonetheless, that's a joke. I'm just kidding. But can you keep going? And can you give a little bit more? Can you give a little bit more? Now, again, we're not talking about manipulators. We're not talking about thieves that, kind of use us to live their lives. But we're talking about what do we do when we're offended? And then finally here, if you're obligated, again, if you're kind of made to do it, right? So you work a job. You have an employer actually. You have a boss. And it's Friday afternoon. And you don't really even like this job. You do it because you gotta, kind of thing. And the clock says 2:30, and punch out time is about 2:50. And he comes about 2:45 and says, you know what, I could use you for another hour. What do you say? Right? What do you say? How do you respond? What do you do? Do you go along? Take the hit? Right? Take the thing? Or do you rise up against it and fight it? You're obligated. Can you be normal there? Well, I'll stay, but he'll know that I'm not happy. That's not what we're talking about, right? Right? I'm going in there, and I'll do it. I know that when I go there, they're going to say something insulting, and so I'll go there, but I'm going to sit in the corner, and I'm going to recoil. I'm going to just defend myself and guard and make sure that I don't get hurt again. No. Can you take care of what you need to take care of in private so that you can be what you need to be in public? Can you get your filling at home with the Lord so you don't need it from the people who are offending you? So that, in fact, he says in verse 42, that you can give to him who asks you, and from him who wants to borrow from you, do not turn away. Now this is, we talk about it with our own kids. This is like a baseline standard of life. Think about all of your relationships, right? Your relationships with your parents, your relationships at work, your relationships at church. Think about all your different relationships. None of us are going to be great at all of them. There are some relationships there where we will be the takers, right? If you're 16, you're going to be a taker. It's okay. Don't take too much, right? And when you take, use it the right way. Prepare to not be a taker, which is the goal, right? But eventually in our relationships as we grow and develop, our goal ultimately should be the giver. to be the giver. It says in Corinthians that it is the responsibility of the parent to store it for the children and not the other way around. The parents do not live off the success of their children. It should be the other way around. The children should live off the success of their parents until ultimately they can be parents and adults on their own. But in our relationships, are we primarily givers or are we primarily takers? Do we give more than we take? And one of the things you're going to find is if you don't learn how to take vertically, you will be required to take horizontally. And you will be a leech that literally kills everybody around you. You will suck them dry because they are not infinite. There is only one infinite source, and that is the Lord himself. Everybody else is finite. And so therefore, if I'm looking to get from them and requiring them to meet my expectations and standards and quotas and everything so that I get, then I'm going to destroy those relationships. If I go into those relationships intending to be the primary giver, I want to give more than I get, then what we'll find is that we can actually build up the relationship. And then if both parties in the relationship are both givers, then it can actually bless the Lord. Years and years ago, my former pastor, Scott Federoff, and his wife, Brenda, were great role models and examples for Julie and I when we were dating and then early in our marriage. And I asked him one time, I said, what's the secret to a good marriage? And he said, the secret to a good marriage is both partners trying to knock each other out with blessing the other person. There isn't a one-way street at all in a marriage. And everybody says a marriage is 50-50. That's a lie. It's a 100% and 100%. Everybody brings to give, right? It's not 50-50. That's a deception, right? Marriage works when both parties are giving. A church works when everybody gives. And if everybody gives more than everybody gets, then the overflow can reach outside the walls of that particular church. If more in the church take than give, then it will begin to implode, right? Happens by and large in churches where 20% of the people do 80% of the work. It's always that way, but it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be. Years and years ago, I remember, his name is slipping my mind right now, pastor from the West Coast, I think West Covina. And Sunday morning, got up to do the teaching, and it was just informed beforehand that there weren't enough children's ministry teachers in children's ministry to actually oversee all of the kids that were coming in. And so the pastor got up on Sunday morning and he said, hey, listen, we have a need in children's ministry. Would anybody like to go back there and watch some of the kids? And in a church way larger than this, he didn't get any hands. So he said, well, then I guess somebody else is going to have to teach today. Packed up his Bible and walked out and went and served the kids. And the congregation sat there and looked at each other. Because if nobody's giving, then the need begins to implode. And that's true everywhere. Whatever, at work, in your social settings, wherever that may be. He says instead here, give to him who asks you, and from him who wants to borrow from you, do not turn away. Just be a giver. Have that generous spirit to give, to bless, to benefit others, and not primarily to take.
In part 1, we learned that the eye for the eye laws were given to the judges to ensure justice and equity, not to promote vengeance. But by Jesus' day, they had turned this law into an obligation for retaliation. And Jesus was not suggesting passivity as a replacement for retaliation, but his desire is that his followers can primarily remain as the giver in those relationships. And Pastor Mike emphasized the importance and need to practice taking from the Lord directly so that we're not required to take from the people around us. This allows us to offer grace even when we're insulted, offended, and obligated. All right, that's all for now. Thanks for listening to the Word for the Valley podcast. So long, everyone.